Today on Face the Nation, we'll devote our entire broadcast to the bombing in Oklahoma. Today, the search for survivors continues in Oklahoma City as the hunt for those who did it intensifies around the world. Is the man in custody somehow tied to a larger conspiracy of extremists? Who are these groups and what are they trying to do? And how is Oklahoma faring? We'll check in with its governor, Frank Keating. And for the latest on the federal efforts to track down the killers, we'll go to the White House and Chief of Staff Leon Panetta. And then we'll expand the discussion with a panel of experts on terrorism. The latest on the situation in Oklahoma on Face the Nation.
Face the Nation with Chief Washington Correspondent Bob Schieffer. And now from CBS News in Washington, Bob Schieffer.
Good morning from Face the Nation in New York. We're going to start this morning with Jim Stewart, who's been covering the investigation of the bombing for CBS News. Jim, let's just recap for a minute. Timothy McVeigh, the man who's been charged in the crime, is still in custody. These Nichols brothers, Terry and James, are still being held as material witnesses. As yet, they have not been charged. The FBI, we're told, is looking for someone else. So having said all that, what else do we need to know this morning, and what have you learned?
Bob, overnight and this morning there have been significant developments. We know now that Timothy McVeigh was taken before a lineup of 3 witnesses last night in Oklahoma City. We're not sure if they made positive identification, but the authorities certainly seem pleased by what they heard. We're also led to believe that charges may be imminent against Terry Nichols. This is the brother who surrendered himself to authorities in Kansas. There is some evidence, not conclusive yet, that he may in fact have driven the truck from Junction City, Kansas, where it was rented, to the site of the bomb blast in Oklahoma City. We know that they are looking for additional people as well. There's still this John Doe number 2 out there, the man who's said to have a tattoo. This, however, they think still could be the Nichols brother. Mr. Nichols does not have a tattoo, but witnesses increasingly keep pointing at him as the possible other suspect. They still, however, believe other people were involved just because the sheer logistics of this thing, the size of that bomb, getting it on the truck, getting it to Oklahoma City, and arranging for cars to be there for the suspects to all leave the city points to the fact that there may have been other people. They have had several good leads come in, though, they tell us, over the 1-800 number, and in leads that they've developed from all the evidence they seized in these many raids that have been taking place last night and today. So
when McVeigh, basically it sounds as if he were taken before a police lineup.
That's correct.
And you think there may indeed have been witnesses that are going to be able to place him at the scene of this bombing? Is that what this suggests?
Well, specifically 3 people have identified the composite is this person they saw outside that bomb blast. Mr. McVeigh was taken before these 3 people last night. We don't know yet that they positively identified him, but there's every reason to believe that since the authorities are happy, that may have been the case, Bob.
And just to underline one other thing, you said you now believe, sources are telling you, that charges may be imminent against Terry Nichols, the other man being held as a material witness.
Yes, sir. He has certainly moved up the list of their suspects.
Okay, Jim Stewart, thank you very much, and you'll come back during the broadcast if there are other breaking developments. We're going to turn now to Oklahoma City and talk to the man who has been the spokesman for his state through all of this, who's been guiding the rescue efforts and all of those other activities down there, Governor Keating. Governor, what is the death toll this morning, and what is the latest on the rescue efforts?
Well, Bob, the death toll remains officially at 71. The number injured is over 700, those treated and released or kept at area hospitals. That death toll will rise dramatically. As you may know, yesterday we were about 60% effective. A combination of rain, a combination of wind, a combination of lightning, and some shoring problems needed at the rear of that building caused us to only be partially effective. This morning, I was here, about 5:30, 5:45, and the problem this morning was an overhang of concrete, just rebar was holding it. That had to be removed. Now the workers are back, and fortunately we have enough people from all over the United States, the Oklahoma City Fire Department and other firefighters from America that are working in the front of that building trying to remove rubble and find survivors. It's a grim business, and obviously after 4 days it is certainly not a very pleasant task, and it doesn't appear to be terribly productive for survivors.
Now, I think you were able to hear what Jim Stewart was reporting here from Washington, what he has learned from sources. Are you able to elaborate on any of that, Governor, or tell us any more details of those events that took place last night?
Well, Bob, I'm not trying to dodge off your question. The fact is, even though my background was in law enforcement, I really have not been focusing on that. My focus has been on the search and rescue effort, and also the effort to make sure that we have sufficient pathologists and other experts to remove the remains as quickly as can be and provide identification and return of the bodies to their next of kin. But I do know from talking to my former friends and colleagues in the FBI that they're very optimistic about the pace of their investigation. As I'm sure you would imagine, something this calamitous, this awful, has the world's attention. Very few thugs are willing to cover for another thug that's a baby killer, and I think that we're going to make enormous progress in that investigation. I just wish that we could find survivors. I wish the progress on this side was as good as the progress on the criminal side.
Governor, let me ask you about this business of these militias and these right-wing groups that we've all come to find out so much about in the last few days. Did you know anything about this sort of thing happening in Oklahoma City, and do you have any reason to believe why something like this could have happened there, and is there any connection to these people to this that happened?
Well, I don't know if there's any connection to these people with Oklahoma City. I can say that unfortunately there are extremist groups in many states. I'm sure we have some in this state, not in the numbers apparently that other states have, but these are individuals who despise the federal government, despise law enforcement, certainly hate the FBI, hate the ATF or IRS. You know, those of us who are bird hunters certainly wouldn't agree if somebody took our shotguns away, but we wouldn't violate the law and we wouldn't kill for it. The same thing, you know, none of us like to pay our taxes, but I can't imagine people violating the law or killing because of taxes. A political statement like that's not worth the life of an innocent human being. The savagery behind us, of course, was absolutely uncalled for and unprecedented. But there are people like that. It boggles the imagination that they exist, but they certainly do exist.
Well, Governor, I know there will be a memorial service there in Oklahoma City later today, and I want to congratulate you on the wonderful job that the officials have done there with this rescue effort. Thank you so much for being with us.
We're
going to take a break now.
Thank you, America.
We're going to take a break now. When we come back, we're going to talk to the White House Chief of Staff, Leon Panetta.
This portion of Face the Nation is sponsored by the Archer Daniels Midland Company, ADM, Supermarket to the World, and by Delta Airlines. You'll love the way we fly.
I can hear Bob.
I can
Testing,
do. I now hear Leon. Good.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Are we
Good,
okay?
Good. You're good. You hear me?
Yes, Bob.
Okay, good. Boy, you.
Boy, this is tight.
Woo. What a morning. Okay. And with us now from his office in the White House, the White House Chief of Staff, Leon Panetta. Mr. Panetta, I'd just like to ask you first, is there anything that you can add on the investigative side of this? How is it going?
The status is pretty much as you've defined it, Bob. It comes down to this. We have three people in custody. We've got Timothy McVeigh, who has been charged. We have the two Nichols brothers who are being held as material witnesses at this point. And we have a fourth individual, the so-called John Doe 2, who is at large and is currently being searched for.
Let me ask you this. Has the president, or I know you all have been talking about this, have you come up with any kind of new legislation or any kind of legislative remedies that you may be announcing anytime soon as a result of this?
Well, the president will talk about some additional steps today. We have been very aggressive about dealing with the whole issue of anti-terrorists, particularly related to foreign terrorists. We've got an antitrust or an anti-terrorism legislation proposal that's on the Hill right now. We have taken steps, obviously, to try to bring those terrorists back, and we do monitor groups, militia groups, and other extreme groups in this country. But it is also clear that the President, talking with the FBI Director, Louis Freeh, has asked him to look at other steps that can be taken to improve the capability of the FBI and other law enforcement officials to be able to go after these kinds of groups when they commit offenses.
Did I understand you to say that the President may discuss some of those steps later today?
That's correct, Bob. I think he's doing a 60-minute interview on CBS, and we'll use that opportunity to define some additional steps.
Would this be something that does not need congressional approval, something that he could do just as an executive order, or would this be something he may be preparing to ask the Congress to do?
I think it's going to involve a combination of steps. Obviously, there are steps that can be taken through executive order, that can be taken administratively, but there may also be additional steps that the Congress will have to take in order to improve our powers here.
I suppose you don't want to scoop the President, but I mean, could you give us any details at all about what it is that he's thinking about?
I prefer for the President to make that announcement.
And he will make some sort of an announcement later today during his 60 Minutes interview.
That's correct.
Tonight. House Speaker Gingrich, as you are well aware, said yesterday that it is now clear to him that the FBI should be given greater authority to infiltrate some of these anti-terrorist groups. What is your take on that?
Well, again, I think the primary focus right now is to capture the individuals involved, bring them to justice, punish them, and try to focus on trying to get the victims out of that terrible Holocaust in Oklahoma City. Beyond that, I think we do need to look at what additional steps may have to be taken. I can assure you, however, that the FBI and the Justice Department have been monitoring these groups. We have ongoing investigations with regards to these groups when allegations are made, and they have been tracked. But the question is, can we do more? And there we're basically allowing Louis Freeh to make those recommendations to the President.
Mr. Panetta, there's been a lot of anti-government rhetoric. It comes over talk radio. It comes from various quarters. Do you think that that somehow has led these people to commit this act? Do they feed on that kind of rhetoric, and what impact do you think it's had?
Well, let's first of all understand that there is absolutely nothing, real or imaginary, that in any way justifies the killing of defenseless children. These people are not patriots. They're cowards. They're not heroes. They're criminals. And let's all understand that. You know, I think probably, Bob, the best way to say it is that when these kinds of events happen, I think it's important for all of us to kind of stand back and look at the state of society, look at our values, look at the worst in humanity and also the best in humanity. And I think the important thing is to try to embrace the best in our humanity. We need to lower our voices. There's been a lot of anger. There's been a growing atmosphere of violence in this country. And I think we need to understand that and try to develop a better sense of community.
Well, both the House and Senate leadership have endorsed a rollback of the ban on assault weapons. Do you plan to make, or does the President plan to make a new appeal now to ask them not to do that? Or?
I don't think there's any question that the President is firmer than ever on the issue of maintaining the ban on assault weapons and the Brady bill. These weapons are designed for one purpose and one purpose only, which is to kill people. And the consequence of that is that law enforcement in this country, joining with the President, were able to get a ban placed on assault weapons. So the President has made very clear that he will veto any effort to try to roll that back, and I think that's where he stands, and particularly in light of these events.
And what about these militias that we're now learning about, Mr. Panetta? Is this of new concern to you? Do you think these people are posing a danger to this country?
Well, extreme groups in this country have always been of concern. I think, look, the first thing to understand is that the vast majority of people in this country are law-abiding, they're decent, they raise their families, they hope that their children will have a great and decent future. But there are extreme groups in this country. We've had to deal with them in the past. They exist at the present time. The important thing is that law enforcement has the responsibility to monitor these groups to make sure they don't violate the law. That's the key.
All right. Thank you very much, Leon Panetta.
Thank you.
When we come back, we're going to have a roundtable discussion on terrorism. That will be in just a minute.
Just at the beginning, and then shut it off as soon as he,
just
when they introduce him.
Okay, hello Los Angeles, and that must be Brian Jenkins, right?
Good morning, Mr. Schieffer.
All right, how are you? And
I'm fine.
Buck Revell is down in Dallas.
I'm here.
You hear me, Buck? Okay.
I'm here, right here.
Okay, and Chuck Schumer is in New York. Chuck?
Hi. Hi, Bob.
Okay.
We're all over the place.
No, I'll just do it. Try to put this into some context. We've brought together a roundtable of experts of sorts on terrorism, and we're going to talk to them now. In our studio in New York, Congressman Charles Schumer, Democrat of New York, he is sponsoring anti-terrorism legislation precisely now. In Dallas, Oliver Buck Revell, a former FBI official who was in charge of investigations. And in Los Angeles, terrorism expert Brian Jenkins. Let's start first in Los Angeles. Mr. Jenkins, do you think that this country should expect more attacks like this? Have we somehow fooled ourselves into thinking we're safe?
Well, I mean, we've always faced groups on the extreme right in years past, some groups from the extreme left, and more recently, in the last few years, potential from threats from abroad as well. The problem is that every one of these major acts does tend to have a certain inspirational quality to them, so that the next act becomes more probable yet as others are inspired to behave in the same way.
Well, we've had so much international terrorism lately that at the beginning of this, many people just immediately thought it came from overseas. Does it concern you more that this is homegrown terrorism rather than terrorism from abroad, or do you find that in a sense better?
Well, to a certain extent, it may be less complicating that it is, at least at this point, appears not to be connected with anything abroad, because we are able to fully apply the law in this country. We don't run into some of the difficulties that we run into when we attempt to both pursue investigations as well as ultimately pursue justice abroad. So this gives us a greater opportunity to resolve this. It also puts out of the picture the notions that were raised initially, as you point out, that if in fact this was sponsored from abroad, are we going to get into the business of retaliation, going after groups abroad? It makes it a lot simpler. No less disturbing, but a lot simpler.
I think that's a very, very good point. Mr. Revell, as a former member of the FBI in charge of FBI investigations, Do you think that we have the handle we need on groups such as these, if indeed this turns out to be that these people are tied to one of these extremist groups?
Unfortunately, not at all. In fact, Mr. Panetta's statement that these groups are being monitored is inaccurate. I only left six months ago, and we had no investigations on any of the militias. We certainly did on some of the white hate groups, the Order, the Aryan Nation group, Posse Comitatus, and so forth. But these are not synonymous, they're not identical, although there is some cross in membership. But under the Attorney General guidelines, we cannot, the FBI cannot, conduct an investigation or even monitor public information that you as a reporter can monitor until there is a criminal predicate, until there is information to believe that a crime has been or is about to be committed. And unfortunately, if that is a horrendous crime, such as the bombing in Oklahoma City, that's much too late.
Well, let me just back up here a minute. You say that even the FBI cannot do what a reporter can do, and that is monitor these groups, unless, did you say, unless you have some sort of evidence that there is a plot underway? Is that what you said?
That's absolutely correct. We cannot take cognizance. We cannot even collect newspaper clippings. The Bureau cannot take any official cognizance of any organization engaged in First Amendment activities unless there is a criminal predicate. And, you know, that is a very difficult standard. And it does mean that the fringe elements of these movements who spin off and base their actions on Waco and Ruby Ridge and the Brady Bill and the assault weapons ban, this coalesces them, and the fringe elements can spin off, and the FBI will have no knowledge until after the fact.
All right. Well, now let's go to Congressman Schumer. Congressman, you're on the Judiciary Committee. You're sponsoring anti-terrorism legislation right now. But first, I must ask you, what is your response to what former FBI agent Buck Revell has just said, that the government was not even monitoring some of these militia groups?
Well, one of the reasons we want to pass this counterterrorism bill, which was introduced earlier, is it would give law enforcement the powers that they need to keep a better eye on these groups without trampling any kinds of constitutional rights. By giving them greater ability to go after the terrorists, we give them greater ability to find the criminal predicates that Mr. Revell mentioned. The RICO law, even if they were to engage in fundraising that would support terroristic activities, those would come under the ambit of this law. So this law would make a real difference. It was introduced not after the Oklahoma City bombing, but before it. It's been carefully reviewed. The FBI Director, Louis Freeh, says it's needed, and I hope it'll move through Congress rather quickly. It's a balanced bill. Doesn't throw out all our freedoms, but it gives law enforcement more of what they need to go after terrorism, both domestic and international.
Are you and House Speaker Newt Gingrich talking about the same thing on this, Mr. Schumer? He said yesterday that the FBI simply needs more authority to infiltrate some of these groups. Is that what your bill is doing?
I don't know about Speaker Gingrich. The chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Henry Hyde, has been very favorably disposed to this bill. I think there is some views in Congress. Some on the very far left don't like the bill at all for civil liberties purposes, although the civil liberties impositions are very minimal. Some on the far right, I suppose, would just like to say no trials, no anything else. But I think the bill is a careful balance, and I hope Speaker Gingrich will support it.
All right, let's go around the horn one more time. I want to go back to Mr. Jenkins because I want to ask you, we have about 2 minutes left. I want to ask each of you, what you heard Mr. Panetta say the president is going to announce some new steps today. Mr. Jenkins, what do you think he ought to announce?
Well, I think certainly the legislation that's moving through is useful, but apart from that, apart from some minor expansions of investigative authority, I don't see a fundamental change in the way we monitor domestic groups or enforce the law in this country coming about.
All right, Mr. Revell, what do you want the president to do today?
I hope that they will re-examine the Attorney General guidelines to give some more balance, to at least allow the law enforcement authorities, specifically the FBI, to know what the public in general can know, so that a trend towards violence through the rhetoric but also through actions can be detected, and these type events can be prevented.
And about 30 seconds for you, Mr. Schumer.
Well, I think two things. One, the president should ask that the rhetoric should be toned down. Even the NRA itself, in their ads, calls Janet Reno ATF tyrannical, says Reno uses force against innocents. Second, I hope that the President and I hope that the leaders of the House and Senate will delay the assault weapons ban, as you had mentioned earlier on the show, for two reasons. One, it brings out the worst of rhetoric, and this should be a time of healing. And secondly, you wouldn't want those who did this thing to think they won some kind of perverted victory.
All right. I want to thank all three of you for a most enlightening discussion. At the White House this morning, the President and Mrs. Clinton planted a tree in memory of the children who died in Oklahoma City. Later today, the First family will participate in a memorial service for all the victims in Oklahoma City. And we close today on a personal note. As all of us watched these terrible events on television this week, we were reminded that there is something called evil in the world, that it is as real as the sun above us and the earth below us, and that it is not always visited upon us by those who live in a different place. But we were also reminded there is goodness, and in the wake of this monstrous act, we saw how real that can be. In a nation that has sometimes seemed indifferent lately to its neighbors, Oklahoma City's children became all our children. At a time when government bureaucrats are demonized, we saw a magnificently coordinated effort, federal, state, and local officials, and just plain neighbors working to comfort the victims and track down the killers. Firemen and policemen who refused to go home when their shifts were over. Doctors who gave no thought to personal safety. The historian Will Durant once wrote that barbarism, like the jungle, does not die out, but only retreats behind barriers its civilization is thrown up against it, and waits there always to reclaim that to which civilization has temporarily laid claim. The barriers against barbarism are love, compassion, hard work, intelligence, and courage, and even through the rubble of this awful week in Oklahoma City, we saw them reinforced. In an awful week, we also saw America at its best. We'll broadcast developments as warranted, so stay with this CBS station. A recap on tonight's evening news and an interview with President Clinton tonight on 60 Minutes. That's it from Face the Nation.